Hello, welcome to the debate on Sky News. I'm Martin Stanford. Here's our take on developments brought together from America, the UK and around the world.
The institution FIFA and football around the world, thank you very much for your kind attention.
Are we entering a new era for world football? The US city which is depriving its residents of fresh water. And Kerry's lapse of concentration forces him to miss vital talks. There's going to be a deep clean of FIFA's finances, a radical overhaul of its administration, and a new president after Sepp Blatter resigned after almost 20 years in charge. So what now for football's world governing body? Well, as usual, the Democrat commentator, Jeffrey Robinson, is in New York, and the Conservative commentator, Armstrong Williams, is standing by in Washington. Jeffrey, what next for world soccer?
Oh, big problems. This is, from a journalist's point of view, this is the gift that keeps on giving. It's been, about a week now since the story, 10 days since the story is broken. And I must say, I've got to say that the sister company of Sky News, the Wall Street Journal, has been brilliant in its coverage. They've been on top of this from day one, inside the hotel when the arrests were happening. And I mean, it's just been great from the standpoint of writing a story. The thing is that I was in a meeting last week, a private meeting about financial crime, in which there were some FBI agents from the same office that began this investigation 3 years ago, when Loretta Lynch, now the Attorney General, was the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. Now, these agents weren't in on the investigation, but, scuttlebutt around the office. And what they said was Blatter and Volke, his French assistant, are the targets. And I'm afraid there is just no escaping.
Armstrong, it's surprising in a sense it's taken so long to get where we've got to now, isn't it?
Well, I'm going to surprise you today. Everyone knows that FIFA and the World Cup is corrupt, and countries are just as corrupt, whether it's Vladimir Putin in Russia, whether it's someone in Dubai, any place that's competing for these games. It's no different if you wanted to put a microscope on the Olympics. You could find the same corruption, the same bribery, the same schemes. No different than the Chicago White Sox scandal in the United States. No different than the NCAA shaving basketball points in the United States. And we understand that the banking scheme is connected to New York and that Loretta Lynch was involved and she has an understanding of this. But is this a way for her to introduce herself to the world? We could care less about soccer in the United States. We could care less about its leadership. We have no interest in it. And yet America is obsessed with scandal. Does this tie back in the fact that Russia got the World Cup, and President Obama and his administration has serious, severe issues with Russia, and they want to further embarrass him by giving the impression that there's a possibility it could be taken away from him. I don't think most Americans care. I think corrupt. I mean, you can look at many institutions. You can look at our government and find schemes where people are paid off in campaigns. So I'm just trying to understand why all of a sudden has the United States decided to take on FIFA?
Well, let's see if we can find out, shall we? Because one guy who can help us is with us today. Let's speak to the sports lawyer, co-founder of Change FIFA campaign, David Larkin, who joins us from Washington. You wanted change, David. You've been arguing for it for years. What should be the first bit of change that should come about?
Well, I think you have to understand that this organization has scandal after scandal after scandal. This is not a new day. This is not a new phenomenon in FIFA. This is a very old phenomenon in FIFA. The problem has been that we have, in essence, FIFA is little more than a secretive club of 25 plus or minus 2 people who operate in secret and have no accountability to anyone but themselves. That sets up the conditions which we see over and over and over again, that this organization at this level, this very FIFA Executive Committee, are always the people targeted with allegations of impropriety and who, in fact, do commit impropriety. It's largely this one entity that's responsible for much of the impropriety that we've seen.
Should the World Cup bids for the next 2 competitions be revisited, do you think?
Well, I think it depends on the facts. And I think that the Sunday Times has done a brilliant job, among many other papers, of really raising some serious questions about how this process was conducted. Moreover, I think you have to understand that there exists a report, in fact, multiple reports, about the allegations of impropriety leveled at this organization. Now, they're kind of self-serving because they were carried out by FIFA's own investigator, Michael Garcia, but those reports do, in fact, exist. But they've been withheld by FIFA for reasons that, frankly, I do not understand. Worse, Mr. Garcia, this organization is so discredited that Mr. Garcia, who carried out these investigations, resigned in disgust because this organization doesn't take impropriety or corruption seriously.
Jeffrey, let's bring you back in at this point.
Please do, because first of all, my friend David, I have to take exception with his criticism of Mike Garcia. Mike Garcia is a former U.S. attorney. That report is not at all self-serving, which is why FIFA suppressed it, and which is why the Swiss are now using that as the basis for their investigation. But Armstrong, last week Armstrong and I were in total lockstep with everything. I'm glad to see it's not contagious and doesn't continue to this week, because Armstrong, as usual, has got it totally wrong. I mean, he completely misunderstands what this is all about. To bring up the White Sox scandal, which was known as the Black Sox scandal of 1919 and match fixing, and it has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with any of that. This has to do basically with the extortion and shakedown of U.S. companies. You bet the FBI should be involved, and you bet the Attorney General should be concerned. This is not something that Loretta Lynch just cooked up yesterday. This has been going on for 3 years, and they've been gathering evidence. Now, the interesting thing is that when the scandal broke and the original 6 people were arrested, and it's interesting to note that Interpol has now issued red notices for 6 people who are not in Switzerland and requesting their immediate arrest. But when the scandal broke, Blatter immediately defended himself in his own role in FIFA, said he would not withdraw from the election, not postpone the election for the presidency. And everybody thought, well, he's going to dig in his heels. We have in the United States a system called plea bargaining, which says to some of the people who are today sitting in jails in Zurich, which is a big come down from the room service of the Bauerlock Hotel. They're sitting in jail cells and they're being told by American prosecutors, instead of serving 20 years in jail, we know how you could probably cut that in half. And as of that very morning, when they walked into the Bauerlock Hotel and arrested these people, Sepp Blatter had no friends because, again, he's the target and they will plea bargain to get the evidence on him. I am convinced that there are unsealed indictments in the system right now with Blatter and Volpe's name in it. These guys are in serious problems because they shook down American companies. That's extortion. That's an American crime.
Well, let me pick up, Jeffrey, with that point to Armstrong here about, of course, Americans should care about this. If there's wrongdoing been done on American soil, or American companies are implicated, or American citizens have been cheated out of staging a World Cup, which is one of the accusations that hangs in the air, then sure, shouldn't Americans care, Armstrong?
Listen, there's a larger point here. There's no question there should be condemnation for greed and corruption and exploitation and building this fiefdom where the few benefit. But the countries are just as guilty. Do you understand what it takes to get the Olympics in your country? Do you know that it's almost like the mob that you have to go through? You have to pay, kiss the king's ring, the kind of shenanigans you must involve yourself in. Are you telling me you're going to totally overhaul the complete system, not just FIFA, but the Olympics and all these other things that involve sport?
You're saying, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wrongs make a right, do they?
It's not. You're not going to change it. What are you going to replace it with? More corruption? Where it's going to be hidden? Answer that. What is it going to be replaced with?
Complete lack of understanding, Armstrong. Total lack of understanding, as usual.
What is it going to be replaced with? More corruption that you can't see for a few years?
An organization that is transparent, operates legally, and does not corrupt.
Let me jump in and get David. Let me get David, who knows a bit about this, having examined the subject. David Larkin, can FIFA be replaced either by changing its personnel or, let's say, fold up that particular organisation and start another one? Can world football be run cleanly?
Absolutely. I think what's interesting to me is if you observe international sport, to Mr. Williams' point, certainly there are great troubles in world sport. But it really all falls back to some very simple ideas that in jurisprudence aren't particularly complicated. Due process, order of law. I mean, for example, I had a client in Brazil, and the Olympic Committee proffered that the Olympic Charter, okay, at the very same time, in India, they said the Olympic Charter is basically like the U.S. Constitution, meaning it is the paramount legal document for all of world sport. Then when we traveled to Brazil and we said, okay, we're going to stand on that principle, the IOC told an AP reporter, and they said, oh, by the way, they're mere suggestions. So, well, this is not complicated. We need order and logic to this process. The answers can be found in modern common law jurisprudence, where you have a system of laws, you have due process, you have independence, and you eliminate conflicts of interest. The anti-corruption community knows how to fix this problem. All that needs to happen is that governments need to say, with respect to gentlemen, the private party's over, the adults are here, and it's time to clean this up.
But the pace of change, David, though, might take a while, might it not?
Well, I think what it comes down to is that you need people and governments to really have an honest relationship with sport. What sport does at the present moment is it says this. For example, let's take the Women's World Cup in Canada as an example. It says, so FIFA says, dear Canada, we want you to spend millions and millions, if not billions of dollars on this event that supports our profits. And by the way, if you want to have any say in the way we operate, stay out of it. That's a very unfair bargain that sport, and that happens at the IOC, and it happens across the board all over the world. So what essentially happens is that we have a very dishonest relationship between society and sport that needs to be addressed, wherein society says, you know what, here's the bargain. If you're going to take and profit based on us supporting you to the tune of billions of dollars, the least you can do is be accountable to us, and that's what needs to happen.
Armstrong, you're agreeing with David then?
Listen, that is the only answer, and I respect what he said. And just don't look at FIFA. Look at all of sports and their connection to governments and the people. It's just corrupt. If you're going to change the culture of corruption, which you can, if you have honest brokers in government and honest brokers in sports, and that is something we don't have now. If you can change that, which is going to take some time, then yes, it's worthwhile.
Jeffrey, are you optimistic the change could come about?
Sure I am. Sure I am. But I mean, this isn't this particular case is not about the Olympic Committee or cycling, doping and cycling, or fixing boxing matches, or the Black Sox scandal of 1919. This is about FIFA, in particular, a thoroughly corrupt, mafiosa kind of organization. What worries me is the fact that Blatter says he's staying on till December. I'm hoping that Swiss prosecutors will be in there to make sure no records get destroyed.
And David Larkin, would you think that actually Sepp Blatter ought to step down a lot sooner than the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Robinson has a great point, and that is this. You have a gentleman who has said that he's resigning, but he's not resigning. What you have is you have the least qualified person in all of the world to reform FIFA is Sepp Blatter, based on not speculation, but a track record, a long track record, in which scandal after scandal after scandal, he's promised reform, and he's proven that he is incapable of doing it. And what should alarm everyone is that this is the gentleman who's now tasked himself with staying on board to reform an organization that there is factual proof that he's incapable of doing. So the very worst person in the world to do this is the person undertaking this task. He should leave immediately. We should be very, very mindful of the fact that there's a real possibility that what's really going on is, and there's precedent for this, is that he's really setting up the conditions where his coronation of a successor takes place, and we really don't have change. Worse, we have an election coming up. Now, this election will be proffered a number of candidates under the banner of change. The problem is that a number of these people, Michel Platini and others, are these people who are part of this institution for a long time, or have the same cultural values. I mean, these are the people who thought the Qatar World Cup was a great idea. We've got to be so cautious moving forward about who stands up and offers themselves as agents of change, because in my opinion, anyone associated with this culture is not an agent of change we can believe in.
From the Change FIFA campaign in Washington, David Larkin, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
A reminder, you can catch up with Sky News Debate on Apple TV, on Roku, on Catch Up, and of course you can find us at skynews.com/US. Next, Detroit, which just 2 years ago filed the largest municipal bankruptcy case in US history, has now shut off fresh water supplies to more than 1,000 residents because they can't pay their bills. And it's going to get worse. There are 65,000 people who are at least 2 months late with their payments, owing the city almost $50 million. Well, Léo Heller is the UN Special Rapporteur on human rights to water and sanitation. He's currently in Brazil. Mr. Heller, thank you for joining us. What's your reaction when you hear that people are having their water supplies cut off?
Yes, our contact with the problem started last year, and in October last year, my predecessor, Catarina de Albuquerque, together with the Special Rapporteur on housing, visited the city and saw several problems regarding water cutoffs. And we are very concerned about the problem because people affected by the cutoffs are mainly poor people without conditions or paying the high bill that the municipality is now applying to them. So this is an important question when we look through the human rights perspective, because affordability is one of the main issues in the human rights of water and sanitation.
Mr. Heller, let me put the point to you that the water authorities say it's an effective threat because most people, when faced with the prospect of being cut off or when it actually happens, immediately find the money and pay the bill.
Yes, I think it's difficult to generalize the situation. What I'm feeling is that most of the disconnections are applied to people with below the poverty line. So this is not a question of not want to pay, but not have the conditions to pay. And this is a question, a very important issue when we look through the human rights perspective. I don't agree that most of the situations are due to not wanting to pay, but mostly not have the conditions to pay.
Let's bring in Jeffrey Robinson in New York and Armstrong Williams in Washington. Armstrong, you go first on this one. This is draconian action on behalf of the Water Authority, isn't it?
Depending on your perspective, and especially if you're an outsider looking at it and you're looking for a story to say that the United States is in violation of human rights, I guess you could come to that conclusion. This is a situation that is a greatly impacting Baltimore, and it is a fact that the local people who work with this area works very closely with people who cannot pay their bills, and they help them set up payment plans. And for senior citizens and people who are disabled, who really cannot afford it, they for many years have worked with them to help them pay these bills. There are always those able bodies who wants to exploit the system and take advantage of it. They get lumped with everyone else, and these are the people that they really pursue. And when they do pursue them, almost 60 to 70% of the time, not only do they pay their bills within days, but if they can't, they work out a payment where they do pay these bills. I think this is something that is being overly exaggerated to make world news, as if the United States does not care about its poor and its indigent. It's not true. And I do think corporations can exploit and take advantage, but I think these corporations work very diligently to make sure that people pay, and if they cannot pay, put them on a payment plan where they can pay at the best of their financial abilities.
See, one of the problems, Jeffrey, it seems to be unfairly picking on individuals, on residents who can't pay these things. There are examples of companies who are in debt to the Water Authority for tens, if not thousands, if not millions of dollars, and they get left alone.
That's right. This story is a big story. It's not about the United States in violation of human rights. It's about some companies that don't understand, and the city councils who are in some instances going along with these companies. I might say that in Detroit, the city council has objected to the foreclosures of the water system. I saw 21,000, and that may be the targeted number. 65,000, 21,000. It doesn't matter. If there's one child who's not getting fresh water, that's a real sin. Now, it's happening in Baltimore. Apparently, it's also happening in St. Louis. This is horrendous. In Baltimore, I saw the figure 369 companies in arrears of $15 million. They have not been threatened with having their water shut off. It is the poor and the indigent who are being targeted, and this is absolutely wrong. Can you imagine the humiliation of having to get water, as some people do in Detroit, from a Detroit water brigade, people carrying buckets to their home with fresh water. This is horrendous in the United States of America in the year 2015, that these companies, the water companies, should be allowed to enforce their will in this way. There are subsidies, and the councils need to step up, the states need to step up, and the U.S. government needs to step up. We can't allow any child at all in this country to go without this basic human right.
Léo Heller, is it technically a basic human right?
I would say that both the levels of the legislations are being broken, because there are some resolutions from the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council about the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation that includes affordability as one of the contents of the human rights. And at the other side, the United States is bound to this international legislation because the United States joined consensus on some of these resolutions, and this means that the United States accept the concept of the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation. So there is probably a situation of a violation of the human rights.
Martin, may I say something, please?
Jeffrey?
It's not just a human rights issue. It is becoming a public health issue. You can't do this. It is morally and perhaps legally wrong. But more important, it is that child who is being endangered, and we do not have the right to endanger any child's life by cutting off water. It's sinful.
I mean, Armstrong, how come these cities are being run in such a way that they end up in debt or going bankrupt and anything else? What's going on?
Liberalism is dead. The Great Society programs is dead. Trying to do for people permanently does not work. People need to learn to do for themselves. They need to understand the importance of an education for their children, personal responsibility. This is what happens when government has failed. It has failed the people. It was very benevolent. It meant well, but you throw these people in a cesspool, and it's very similar. And these cities are being led by Democratic mayors, Democratic city councils, people who once considered themselves as victims and minorities in charge. And yet the situation is not better, it's worse. Go and ask yourself why. Because when given power, they become greedy, take care of their own, take care of the corporations that don't pay their bills, and forget about the poor. It's an indictment of liberalism and the failed leadership that they continue to put in power.
Léo Heller, final thought to you. I bet you wouldn't, when you took up this job as the Special Rapporteur, you wouldn't have thought that you'd be dealing with American cities. I thought you'd be thinking of places in the south of the world, the global south in Africa and so on, wouldn't you?
Exactly. Yes, we know that there are several situations of violations in the developed countries, but of course, the worst situations are in poor countries. So it's, of course, a surprise that so absolutely impressive situation is taking place in the U.S. What is important in this case is that the people affected by the cutoffs are mostly the most vulnerable people. So it's a very concerning question, because these most vulnerable people, poor people, disabled people, the elderly, people with chronic diseases can be extremely affected in their health and their dignity on this situation of cutoffs. I'm sure that the United States has full conditions to remedy this situation and not disconnect these people and reconnect people who was disconnected before. There are several mechanisms that can be taking place. For example, subsidies, social protection, and several other ways not to allow these disconnections.
Okay. We thank you for your contribution. Léo Heller, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Now, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, missed a key conference on Islamic State after he broke his leg while cycling during a break from nuclear negotiations with Iran in Switzerland. He was flown back to Boston aboard a US military C-17 transport plane. So should a man of this stature really be taking personal risks? Let's ask our two experts, Jeffrey Robinson in New York and Armstrong Williams in Washington. Jeffrey, how are you in a bike?
I'm not nearly as good as John Kerry, but then most people aren't. John Kerry is a very serious cyclist. I mean, he's got the very serious, big professional bikes. He rides with professionals, and one of the cycling magazines in the States noted that if he were to compete in his age group in America in cycle races, like the Tour de France or the Tour de America, but for his age group, he'd be one of America's top cyclists. He takes this very seriously. It's an unfortunate accident. One of the things that Armstrong will say is, well, it disrupted the talks. No, actually it didn't, because the talks take place on the next low level down. So they continue and he's in touch. But the thing that I found most interesting is that there was a story that came out, because he takes cycling so seriously, he shaves his legs, which may be too much information.
Armstrong, he is, on Jeffrey's account then, a very serious cyclist. He should be doing this, should he? Or do you think this was actually quite a convenient way of getting out of some more boring talks with Iran?
It's really not about cycling. You've got to stay in shape. You need a reprieve. These are very intense talks. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of controversy over it. It's truly still a headache for the president, trying to figure out just exactly where they're going. And so, you have to admire someone who sets an example of exercise and is trying to stay in shape. And you know what? You can get it right 1,000 times, and you just can have one mishap. And at his age, I'm sure it would have a greater impact. It's more difficult for him to heal. And I'm sure they wanted him to get him out of that country as soon as possible to a place that he's comfortable with in his home state, so he could get it taken care of and get in rehab as soon as possible. So you've got to respect that about him and anybody else who continue to set that example, that you should do everything you can when you get a break to stay healthy.
Well,
okay, Armstrong and Jeffrey, I'll leave you to get out your bike ride for another week. We'll see you soon. That's it for this edition of The Debate. You can continue watching Sky News on Apple TV, on Roku, on Catch Up, and of course on skynews.com. Until next time, goodbye.